All right, good afternoon, Admiral Brown. Thank you for that kind introduction. Before I get started, I would still like to know who the influential people are going to be that are going to be speaking this afternoon, because I really don't think it's me. In fact, I had the same experience as you when Ernest was putting the press on me to come speak at this event, talking about the governor and the lieutenant governor, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not sure how you ended up at me, but here we are. I'm honored to be here to speak before you today. Hopefully find something useful in the presentation. Good. Okay. As mentioned, I'm the chief of the Ports for National Defense program at Scott Air Force Base with the TA-JD PAC, and I could easily spend the rest of the afternoon talking about the dual-headed nature of our organization, but I will definitely spare you all the pain and agony of trying to understand all that. Just understand that we have an Army chain of command and a joint chain of command up through USTRANSCOM and the Department of Defense. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the national defense programs. If we can go to the slideshow, please. Next slide. Okay, like any good military brief, we've got an agenda, what we're going to cover here today. So starting at the top, what I'd like to describe as why. Why is it that we do what we do? Then we're going to transition into what we do. Then how we do it. We're going to do a little bit of a focus on Texas transportation infrastructure, which is kind of why we're all here, right? Then we're going to get into the individual national defense programs, both highways, railroads, ports. One that perhaps is not very well known, defense access roads. I'll touch on that just a little bit because I don't know how applicable it is to this group, but for awareness, we'll cover it. And then the last two there, infrastructure and traffic engineering, we're not going to really cover those, but I'm happy to answer any questions either during or after if anybody has any questions on any of that. And I think what you'll see as we go through the slides is that I'll try to touch on some common themes that came up throughout today's event, things like resiliency, contested logistics, and things like that, to make sure that you all understand that those are things that we're looking at as well, and trying to do the best we can to overcome them, and make sure that the nation's infrastructure can suit DoD's needs at time of war. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the why slide. This is the why do we do what we do. So the basis for the national defense programs can be tied back to this executive order 12656. 12656, which is basically the assignment of emergency preparedness and responsibilities. And it basically directs government offices to make plans to identify the civilian infrastructure that would be needed to support the national defense. And so really that's the basis for the road, rail, and ports for national defense programs, because over time, the DoD went away, particularly on the seaport side, from owning its own facilities to relying upon the commercial infrastructure. And so this, again, is the basis for those programs. Next slide. Okay, so this is, as mentioned, this is the what slide. So this is a DoD directive, 451011, and it basically establishes the policies that we work under in the programs for national defense. Importantly, that second bullet down there, it also specifically assigns the director of TEA, formerly Mr. Bustler, now Mr. Ryan Samuelson, as what we call the SADE, or the Special Assistant for Transportation Engineering. This is an important role that allows and gives the authorities for us to direct liaison with the commercial entities, whether it's the seaports, the rail companies, or the federal and state highway entities, to ensure that DoD's needs are being accounted for in individual plans for infrastructure investment and things like that. So again, as mentioned, those are the four programs down at the bottom that we're going to talk about a little bit further later on. But again, this is the what slide. Okay, next slide. So this is the how. So DoD Manual 451012 prescribes the specific policies and procedures that are used by each of the national defense programs to conduct their mission, to do what it is they need to do. And you can see there in that second bullet, that directs the commander, USTRANSCOM, to oversee the director of TEA, but gives that, delegates that responsibility of executing the national defense programs to the director of TEA. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here we're going to get into Texas infrastructure. So you can see on the map, pretty busy. Rail lines, road lines, seaports. So on the right-hand side, I've cataloged some statistics that all get at one message, which is at the very bottom of the slide. Texas transportation infrastructure is very important to and heavily utilized by the DoD. Okay. From a highway perspective, there are more DoD important miles of roadways in Texas than any other state in the country, 6,000 miles. Third bullet down there under highway, the roadways in Texas connect 6 power projection platforms. Those are the big military installations like Fort Hood, Fort Sill, Fort Bliss, Fort Carson, Fort Riley, where the big military units are located. And in the event of a war, surge deployment, those installations are going to be mobilizing forces to a variety of seaports, to include the ones in Texas. From a rail perspective, similar to highways, most amount of mileage of DoD important rail lines of any state in the country at 3,000. Then also on rail, not just in terms of number of miles, but the utilization of those miles. So in 2023, 24,000 rail cars were shipped to or from defense sites or strategic seaports in Texas. That was the most of any state in the country. Okay. Moving on to seaports. We have 4 strategic seaports on the Gulf Coast. 3 of them are in Texas. And they've all been superb partners to my program as we conduct periodic site visits, which we'll get into a little bit later in the presentation. Sticking on the theme of seaports, since 2002, the 3 strategic seaports in Texas, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Corpus Christi, have combined received and processed almost 500,000 measurement tons of export cargo, which over that time period represents 35% of all DoD movements. So significant amount of cargo for the DoD is being moved through Texas seaports. Next slide. Okay. So inevitably, one of the things that comes up often in these types of events is, well, hey, if this infrastructure is so important to you guys, why don't you invest in it? Well, it's a great question. Well, and part of the answer is we can't, first of all, short of congressional direction into congressional language with budgets. But due to competing requirements within the government, barracks, airfields, ships, planes, tanks, things of that nature, investments in civilian infrastructure would not score very high within the DoD in order to fund improvements. So instead, the DoD relies upon self-investment. Now, there are exceptions to that. There's always exceptions. So top of the slide are a few exceptions. One being Port of Alaska. Kind of considered an island from an infrastructure perspective. There's no rail connecting the lower 48 up to the state of Alaska. It is the only port in the state that can outload DoD forces at the scale that we need it to. So it's kind of unique in that regard and kind of holds a special place. And there is a history of DoD funding improvements or helping fund improvements at the Port of Alaska. The other option would be if a requirement is substantially driven by the DoD. In other words, DoD actions have resulted in an impact on the facilities that would require us funding. One of the examples up there is the commercial port of Guam. Military forces plan to relocate there, requires the port to be beefed up enough to be able to receive the cargo associated with that move. And that's done through the Defense Access Road Program, in part. Keeping on the theme of defense access roads, BRAC, Base Realignment and Closure, which is what brought me out to the cornfields of Illinois in 2007 from the coast of Virginia, which I do still miss from time to time. But if the military relocates a significant number of people to different installations and the connecting roadways to those installations are undersized to receive all of those new people, money can be spent through the Defense Access Road Program to improve those connecting roadways and gates to those installations. It's a really unique program, but that is a possibility. So in terms of our approaches, you'll see a pretty consistent theme, I think, throughout the different modes. So in all of them, we leverage the existing civilian infrastructure. For highways, we advocate with the state and federal entities to try to get them to give some sort of deference to roadways that are specifically important to the DoD. Rail is a little bit of a different animal. And I know Ben Jensen's in the back there. I'm counting on him to keep me straight on rail stuff since I'm not exactly a rail guy. And similarly, Mr. Kashner, you keep me straight on the highway stuff. But the commercial rail lines, they're all privately owned entities. They're all privately owned companies, whether it's UP, BNSF, et cetera. They own their own lines. And so they're responsible for maintaining their own lines. One of the biggest things that the Railroads for National Defense program does with respect to rail traffic is adjudicate or help adjudicate abandonment requests. So there might be a rail line connecting a military installation, kind of off the main network somewhere, and it may not be a beneficial line financially for that rail company to continue to operate and maintain. And they might pursue an abandonment of that line. Well, that rail line might be important to the national defense. And so the Railroads for National Defense program, working through the Surface Transportation Board, can provide justification for why that rail line needs to be kept open and why the commercial rail company who owns that line should be compelled to continue to maintain it and keep it in operation for the national defense. So that's an interesting little side business, if you'd like to call it that, for the Railroads for National Defense program. And then seaports, again, largely commercial, although, somewhat municipally owned and operated. Some of them are private. Some of them are municipally operated. So landlord versus operating ports. But again, we rely upon port self-investment to meet our deployment needs. Now, one interesting note here is that we recently had a little bit, I don't necessarily call it a breakthrough, but a little bit of a change to our relationship with the Department of Transportation, particularly from a port perspective. So for those of you that are not aware, there's this thing called the Port Infrastructure Development Program, which is a federal grant program that ports can go and apply for grant money to use to improve their port facilities. Up until recently, that process has kind of been done behind the scenes. However, this last year, I personally was able to participate in the adjudication of some of those grant applications and determine whether or not any of those projects offered a defense benefit, which certainly is nice that the DOT is allowing to do that for the DoD, so that when those grants are being adjudicated, the people that are responsible for making those decisions have visibility over what projects would benefit the national defense and which ones would not. Okay, next slide. All right. Mike, you're up. No? Oh, all right. Yeah, so we just start with the Highways for National Defense Program. So I think what you're going to see is a common theme here amongst the slides for the different modal programs, with the mission and some of the details in the middle bullets there, and then some of the usually the bottom third of the slides are kind of talking about ongoing initiatives for each of the different modal programs. So in terms of mission, the basic bottom line is that those three national defense programs want to ensure that that each of the representatives, whether it's the state DOTs, federal highway, the port authorities, or the rail companies, are accommodating DoD's needs when they're making infrastructure investment decisions. Because again, if we deploy to go to war, we are going to do that over the railroads, over the highways, and through the seaports that the DoD, for the most part, does not own and operate. So it is very much in our interest to make sure that that infrastructure is capable of meeting our deployment needs. And so through that role, the national defense programs have that authority to negotiate or collaborate, coordinate with those entities to ensure that DoD's needs are being protected from those by those modal entities. So again, common theme here with the STRANET, and it's on the second to bottom line, the word minimum. You'll see that in the railroad slides and in the port slides, okay? The STRANET, Strategic Highway Network, represents the minimum network of roadways within the U.S. That are important to the national defense. So you can see there we've got about 62,000 miles of highways, including the interstate system. Anybody here, trivia, anybody here know what inspired Eisenhower to develop the current interstate system? Cheating. Did I hear it? Correct, the Autobahn. He saw the Autobahn in Germany and was so impressed by it that he decided to come back to the U.S. and develop our own national highway system, now known as the interstate system. A lot of interesting history detail on that, to include the I don't know if I'd call it a pilot project, but the inauguration of that highway system deploying across the country, which was quite the endeavor based upon what I've read. So I think, kind of in closing, for highways there at the bottom, one of the concerns that we have within the DoD is that despite our close and good working relationship with Federal Highway, to date, we've been unsuccessful in getting national defense added to the strategic plan as a strategic goal for USDOT and Federal Highway. It's an ongoing effort to try to get national defense added as a phrase into their strategic plans. It'll be an ongoing, I don't necessarily call it a fight, but an ongoing initiative to try to get that language added into the strategic plans. Okay, next slide. So specifically in terms of highways, we are wrapping up right now. As you can see down there at the bottom of the slide, 15 of 18 power projection platform route studies have been complete. So basically, and it's kind of hard to see on this map, but we've got some yellow routes here running from the major power projection platforms to various seaports within the Strategic Seaport Program. And basically, we are analyzing those routes very heavily to identify any limiting factors, oversize, like dimensional constraints that might limit the transit of military equipment, and things of that nature. So as mentioned, 15 of 18 are going to be complete, and they will be have documentation on all of the limiting factors that are being identified. And that work is being done in conjunction with Federal Highway Administration and the state DOTs. All right, next slide. Okay, railroads for national defense. Again, very common theme from the mission is to ensure that the civilian rail network meets DoD's needs. As mentioned, previously with the highways. The STRACnet, or Strategic Rail Corridor Network, represents DoD's minimum network of rail lines needed to meet our deployment needs. And that covers, as listed there, over 140 defense sites, 35,000 STRACnet miles, and 6,300 defense connector miles in the network. Important to note, as you see the red lines on the map, the use of the term corridor in the network is very specific, okay? That is not to identify a specific rail line, although there are specific rail lines identified in each corridor, but within each corridor, there are multiple rail lines. So look at the red lines on the map as corridors instead of individual single rail lines, even though a primary rail line is selected within each corridor. Hopefully that makes sense. And then, as mentioned, we serve, we monitor STB proceedings for abandonment issues, and we advocate for DoD's needs to avoid, I'll call them unnecessary, unwanted abandonments that would negatively impact the DoD's ability to move cargo. And then, in terms of some current events going on within R&D, is rolling stock rail cars, whether they be flat cars, well cars for containers, or flat cars for rolling stock, tanks, trucks, things of that nature. The DoD is very dependent on all types of rail cars to move its cargo across the rail network across the U.S. In fact, some of them are in the process of being aged out. There is a company on here called TTX, which is a conglomerate of various railroad companies that manage a pool of flat cars that can be used for commercial needs and DoD needs. So a very important collaboration effort to ensure that rail cars are where they need to be moved. Okay, next slide. So again, as mentioned, minimum network, established originally in the 1970s. I'm kind of stealing my own thunder here a little bit on the slides. So as mentioned, corridors, not a line. Important note on that last sub-bullet of the first set of bullets is STRACnet is not a routing guide, okay? It's not to be used to route specific cargo along rail lines. It is just being used to identify and highlight those rail lines that are most important to the DoD. And so basically we have what I call the kind of the last tactical mile, which would be those routes that connect the installations or the seaports to the main STRACnet lines, and those are called STRACnet connector lines. And then finally, my counterparts or my colleagues in the Railroads for National Defense program back at Scott Air Force Base are actively working on what they're calling STRACnet 2.0. And as part of that, there's going to be a new methodology that looks at more accurate location data for rail cars, more efficient routing, and more accounting for real-world usage of the rail lines using data. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we talked about rail cars. So this is basically two main bullets here. First one is ammo fleet. So we've got to move containerized ammunition via rail car. So those are very important. Although given the preponderance of container usage in commercial seaports, we're not overly concerned about running out of access to rail cars to move containers, be it ammo or general sustainment cargoes. Where we do have concerns right now is with the tie-down flat cars that we use to move heavy cargo, tanks, trucks, things of that nature. And so there's a whole lot of detail on this slide that I won't get into with you. Just know that the Railroads for National Defense program is actively involved in trying to make sure that DoD has access to a sufficient number of flat cars to meet its deployment needs. And so the last bullet here, there's an acronym on there that I'm not sure if it's spelled out somewhere that I'm sure most of you are probably not familiar with, and that's MCRS, Mobility Capability Requirement Studies. So those are OSD department level events where they look at contemporary O-plans or deployment scenarios to leverage, or basically the output of that for us at the National Defense Programs is a high water mark. Here's the number of rail cars that you need. Here's the number of seaports that you need. Here's the number of miles of roads that you need in order to meet our deployment requirements. And so much like ports and highways, rail provides an input to those studies on the current status of the rail network. Okay, next slide. All right, so now into the most important program, selfishly speaking, of course. Ports for National Defense. Again, much like the previous two programs, our mission is to assess the port infrastructure and ensure that DoD has access to a sufficient amount of port infrastructure to meet our deployment needs. On the map, you'll see the 18 commercial and 6 military ports that are designated as either strategic seaports or identified as alternate seaports. And you can see the definitions for strategic and alternate seaports. We also have a tertiary category of ports called candidate seaports. Those are basically every other port in the U.S. that is not strategic or alternate that we have some level of information on. And it's important to note that the strategic seaports have, as Ernest and the other ports in the room, Larry, well know, there are administrative overhead burdens, whatever you want to call them, associated with being a commercial strategic seaport, to include port readiness plans, which outline the specific infrastructure that they have agreed to make available to the DoD and the timelines with which that infrastructure would be made available. Okay, next slide. So in terms of management, the Strategic Seaport Program is managed by a multi-government agency body called the National Port Readiness Network. This network is chaired by the Maritime Administration and includes members such as USTRANSCOM, SDDC, the Coast Guard, the Corps of Engineers, TSA, NORTHCOM, FORCECOM, MSC. So sort of a who's who, if you were to think about who all would have their fingers in the pot of a military deployment from CONUS. These are the major players in that. So there's an MOU out there that outlines roles and responsibilities for all the member agencies, and there are regularly recurring meetings to discuss and resolve various strategic seaport related issues. Okay, next slide. So this is a snippet, and it is notional. This is not actual real data. Otherwise, I would not be able to show it to you. But this is effectively the chart that we use in the ports program to determine whether or not we have a sufficient amount of capacity, throughput capacity in our strategic seaports to meet DoD's needs. And as you'll see, maybe if your eyesight's really good, mine's not, but the first purple block there is what I will call, I'll call it the resiliency block. Okay, we talked about resiliency earlier today. So basically we ensure that we have enough port infrastructure to overcome what we would call normal or common delays, weather, ships, trains, things like that might cause a delay to port operations. Then we take the most high-risk port on each coast that might be vulnerable to a natural disaster, be it an earthquake, volcanic eruption, hurricane, and we assume that that port is not available. The remaining ports on that coast are then compared against the requirements to see, do we have enough, do we not have enough? If we do not have enough, then we look to get more. Okay, next slide. And this is definitely an eye chart because there's one thing that has been pretty consistent over my time in this position is that Congress continues to show regular and recurring interest in the Strategic Seaport Program. On the screen are the various lists of reporting requirements that we have had levied against us through Congress. And so with the most recent being in 2020, which unfortunately means, based upon the pattern on the slide, that we are probably about due. So I won't read all those off to you, just know that Congress continues to be very interested in the strategic seaports. Okay, next slide. As mentioned, defense access roads. I think I've covered already most of this already, but it's basically, as we like to affectionately call it, a legalized money laundering campaign. And basically what that means is that we can use DoD dollars to fund improvements of civilian commercial infrastructure. Now, there are very strict guidelines and requirements that must be met before that can happen. And the DoD entity needs to be able to come to the table with money. There is no specific pot of money associated with the Defense Access Roads program. They are only using existing dollars, and it's, again, a mechanism to use DoD money to improve civilian infrastructure. And I think I mentioned early on probably the most appropriate example to that would be a specific military installation gets a significant influx of personnel to that location, and the connecting gates and the connecting roadways are no longer sized appropriately to receive all of those people. Defense Access Roads is a program that can be used to take DoD money and improve those connecting roadways and gates to accommodate that increase in traffic. Okay, last slide. So this is my get off the stage slide. So I'll just re-emphasize some things that I've said already. DoD is heavily reliant upon civilian infrastructure. For many decades now, we do not own the infrastructure of our own to be able to deploy the force by ourselves. We have to use civilian and commercial infrastructure to meet our deployment needs. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. National defense programs exist to form that connective tissue between the DoD and those civilian entities to make sure that DoD's needs are being voiced and protected to the extent that we can. The middle of the slide is just a repeat of some of the authorities and responsibilities and where we get those responsibilities from. An emphasis that we, in general, do not advocate for specific projects. We do, however, advocate for the importance of various transportation infrastructure, be it highways, rail, or seaports, to be accounted for and part of the process when federal grant applications are being adjudicated. As mentioned on the last slide or two slides previously, Congress continues to show interest. And then just a foot stomp, since we are in the great state of Texas, Texas transportation infrastructure is very important to the DoD, and it's heavily used by the DoD and will probably continue to be so for quite some time. So thank you for your time and your attention. And I don't know if we're taking questions now or if we're going to do it as part of the next session.
Actually, we'll do it now.
Okay.
Any questions for you?
Happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
Sir.
Sir, thank you for the presentation. Very informative. My name is Jack from American President Lines, a U.S. flag ocean carrier. I hope you'll humor me with I'm going to ask you a question about Indo-PACOM for a second.
Okay.
And I just came from a 2-year stint in Guam, and the cranes there, the gantry cranes, were a hot topic on almost every week's news cycle.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier about defense access roads. That's a big issue there as well, and they're very happy to receive whatever money is going to be laundered over there for
Sure.
those improvements. But we are curious about the gantry crane replacement, because in the next 3 to 4 years, those cranes are going to be going offline because of their age. Will your office be assisting with any kind of DoD funding that could be used to replace those cranes?
Great question.
I do not see my office being involved in providing any funding because we don't have any. We can certainly advocate for through USTRANSCOM, and I imagine that they will be involved because Guam has been very very involved in various entities related to strategic seaports and Transcom and things of that nature. I would also say, and the representatives from the 842nd can either agree or refute this, but I would say by and large, our DOD, that is, deployment missions are very knuckle draggish. We don't really rely upon the container cranes to deploy our force. We do have containers that we move, yes. There are other avenues that we can use to move those containers, but by and large, most of our equipment is rolling stock. And it's rolled off of rail cars, off of trucks, into staging areas, and then rolled onto ro-ro vessels, giant parking lots. So our reliance upon container cranes is limited. And to reassure you, Chinese-owned cranes, Chinese-manufactured cranes, is a very hot topic at USTRANSCOM. They are aware of it. They are tracking it. I've been involved in it almost up to my eyeballs. And I will say, specifically for DOD purposes, the DOD is prohibited from and will not purchase Chinese cranes for DOD installations. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, just a short follow-up, I have to say it, but we do have quite a bit of military cargo that comes into the port of Guam.
Yes.
And we have to use their gantry cranes.
Yes.
We did some very heavy lift moves recently that involved, missile defense related cargo.
Sure.
And actually we had to hire a mobile crane to support us because the gantry cranes didn't have the capacity to take the stuff off the ship. So it was unfortunately not a railroad move, but I think that also highlights one of the gaps that are out there. And certainly, I would assume all the folks are sharing the information upwards, but
sure.
There's a little bit of a gap out there that hopefully the DOD is looking at and will address.
Sure. And the important thing, as you highlighted, is that there are options, right? If the gantry cranes go down, we can get mobile cranes. Now, obviously, in a place like Guam, the ability to get mobile cranes is sort of limited because, well, it's an island and a small island at that. So yes, your point is well taken. I would also say that just to reemphasize, I don't know if I said it during the main part of the brief, but our main focus is on that next large-scale contingency operation, the mass mobilization of combat units. While the I'll call them peacetime moves, unit rotations, training rotations are all interesting data points for us, those are not the main focus of our programs.
In the news recently, there's been some talk that Transcom will be given additional authorities with regard to their ability to influence issues that they think involve contested logistics. And what I heard was that Congress has heard about contested logistics now for a long time, but they haven't seen any requests for any funding to help mitigate the contested logistics. So they're going to perhaps Transcom in charge of that, and that might bring some additional funding down the road. Philip, did you have any comment on that?
At my level, that's news to me.
Really?
Yes. I will say that when I say that's news to me, the specific authorities that you're referencing, contested logistics are a hot button topic throughout Transcom and SDDC. In fact, that last chart, or one of the last charts where we talked about requirements versus capabilities for the ports, we continue to try to improve our analysis and the inputs into that analysis. In fact, in the next one of those things that we do, we're going to try to pull in more contested logistics stuff. And so I would say Transcom and SDDC are very much in tune with contested logistics, and there are many, many initiatives within both commands to identify, account for, and try to mitigate and overcome those things. but I'm not directly involved in those conversations.
It sounds like your job might be expanding a little bit.
That's okay with me. Job security.